The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The World Cup has indeed started. We're going to have a great interview later in the show today with the nation's sports editor, Dave Zirin, about all the issues surrounding the World Cup. Is it moral to watch? What should we be doing? What level of activism should we have around the problems with the World Cup and, quite frankly, with Olympics and other huge world sporting events? I have to say, Lewis, I have been absolutely loving it so far. I've watched most of the games, I have to say. I keep getting tweets from people saying, who exactly are you rooting for in this? Is it Argentina? Is it Team USA? Who is it that you're rooting for, David? So I want to make it very clear, Lewis. I want to channel Phil Davison and ensure that we have clarity this evening on who I am rooting for in the World Cup, and then we will ask Lewis. My primary team that I am following and rooting for and will be wearing a jersey on game days for, even if they happen to coincide with shows, is Argentina. That's the country I'm from. And this has nothing to do with political allegiance or anything else. It is simply a desire to see my home country bring back the first World Cup for them since 1986, the last time Argentina won. That's my number one choice. Second to that would be the neighbor country to Argentina of Uruguay. We love Uruguay politically. We've talked about their president, Jose Mujica. Very interesting stuff going on there. I visited Uruguay last summer, or the summer before, actually, I think it was. Found it to be a fascinating country. That is my second choice, Lewis. Unfortunately, Uruguay already lost their first game. And my third choice is Mexico. I have liked the Mexican team for a long time, and they won their first game, and that is the third team that I have there. If I had to say a fourth, it might be cool to see the USA do well. I mean, it's a non-starter. The USA is in a really difficult group with Ghana, Germany, and Portugal. Germany and Portugal, dominant teams. Ghana, very good, and has actually done well against the U.S. in years past. It's very hard to imagine the U.S. is going to get out of even the group play. So now, Lewis, I will go to you. What is your stance on the World Cup matches?
I'm enjoying it, David. I've been watching as many as I can, and I think that we're going to get a lot of hate because the U.S. is your fourth pick. I think this might be proof that you hate America, David.
Right.
Yes,
I hate Americans and I hate America because I'm not that up on the U.S. doing well in the World Cup, a sporting event which many would argue is irrelevant anyway.
That's true. So my first pick, of course, would be the United States, David, but I am a realist. I understand that it's quite a hill we have to climb. So that being said, yes, I'm enjoying the games very much, and I'm hopefully going to watch the U.S.-Ghana game today.
Yeah, U.S. and Ghana playing today. That'll be interesting. Maybe U.S. can exact some revenge on Ghana for years past. And yeah, in New York City, you can find a place for just about any team. And I say just about because maybe you can't for some of the teams. But yesterday, for the game that was yesterday, I went to a bar that they were expecting about 100 Argentina fans, most of them Argentinian. And it ended up being close to 200 people, Lewis. I mean, it was just incredible. That's definitely something that I guess, at least with Argentina, outside of New York City and Miami, it would be tough to find a group like that, you know?
Right. I have certainly never seen that many Argentinian people in a room together. It'd be terrifying, really.
Yeah, it was, Lewis. That's no question about that. Okay, we talked last week about Iraq, and I told you about how Iraq is quickly becoming almost as chaotic as it was in the immediate aftermath of the U.S. invasion, which was supposedly going to be met with a parade of roses, where roses were going to be thrown at all of the troops. As we know, that didn't happen. As we know, it ended up being a war based on completely faulty intelligence, false pretenses, and really outright lies from so many members of the George W. Bush administration. The situation in Iraq is continuing to get worse and worse and worse. Here are some headlines. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, also known as ISIS, has taken responsibility for the killing of 1,700 Iraqi soldiers. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, after it turned out there were no weapons of mass destruction, after it turned out that there was no connection between Saddam Hussein and 9/11 and Al-Qaeda, we had many Iraq war apologists who said, hold on a second, guys, those things didn't happen, but because of what Saddam was doing to his people, it still made sense to go in. Okay? If you believe that, then you should have the same reaction when we hear about 1,700 Iraqi soldiers that have been killed, because it is the so-called humanitarian crisis that many of you on the right apology side claimed was the reason to go in. We're not really hearing that right now, though, are we, Lewis? We're just hearing criticism of President Obama for not ending the war in the right way, but it's all the same nonsense we've heard before from the war hawks.
Right. I don't see the difference here. I guess after everything we've been through, it's a lot easier to say, well, we just shouldn't get involved. We can't get involved. We spent too much money. We've had too many soldiers die. And I guess that makes sense, but it is a bit hypocritical here.
We also have militants claiming that they've conducted a mass execution of Iraqi forces, and this has caused the White House to scramble. And don't shield your eyes from the reality that the U.S. is starting to make some moves here. Of course, ground troops are not even a discussion right now. I don't even want to talk about that because no one is saying that is happening or close to happening. However, the White House did send the carrier, George H.W. Bush, as well as an amphibious ship full of Marines into the Arabian Gulf to give the administration more options. And we are seeing mobilization. I mean, I don't know how else to say this. And we have only that initial invasion of Iraq to blame here. If you look at foreign policy expert after foreign policy expert, Lewis, making very clear that the destabilization that happened in the immediate aftermath of the George W. Bush freedom delivery that took place or was supposedly taking place in Iraq, that destabilization devolving into sectarian violence, which ultimately has now started up again. It was completely predictable. It was a mistake from day one. And the crazy thing is, we're starting to see on corporate media the same so-called experts, the military guys who are going to tell us what are the right missiles, what are the right bombs, tell us the qualifications of this particular aircraft carrier. Those same people who cheerleaded the way into the initial war with Iraq are being looked at as the experts again by corporate media. It is sickening.
Right. But unfortunately, they also are the experts, David. And we may need to rely on them a bit and some of their expertise, as ridiculous as it seems.
In what way, though? Because, Lewis,
at least the motivations in this case are good, are sincere. I mean, we actually need to intervene now, without a doubt. Of course, it's our fault that we have to in the first place. But
I see what you're saying. So you're saying, essentially what Lewis is saying is, because we caused this thing in the first place, it's not that crazy to think we might need to go back in. I mean, is that generally what you're saying?
Essentially, right. And we do have a humanitarian issue here, David. I mean, tons of people are being slaughtered. I mean, I think we should intervene.
All right,
of course,
so
this is happening in other countries where we're not intervening.
Right.
But
we didn't necessarily cause the problems in those other countries. I get what Lewis is saying. I mean, I want to just take issue with the media stuff. I just reread Jeff Cohen's book, Cable News Confidential. He worked as a senior producer on the Phil Donahue Show on MSNBC. Read the book if you haven't. It will remind you of the disgusting run-up to war, the countdown to war program on MSNBC. Fox News had a similar thing. It was just sickening. And these unopposed military experts who were there only to talk about tactics and weapons and missiles and just completely missing a sober voice that questioned the intelligence, questioned the motives in the first place. Read the book, especially if Iraq keeps flaring up the way it seems to be doing. We now have yet another piece of evidence that contradicts what we hear often from the American Republican base, which is we support the troops. We've talked about this many times. We hear that the Republicans support the troops. Of course, they seem to be okay sending troops into harm's way based on faulty intelligence. They seem to be okay not properly funding armor and other equipment that troops need to stay safe. And the big thing is when they come back, we see this reluctance to properly fund care for troops. And this seems to happen time and time again. And we could actually look at this back in the Vietnam War. We can probably look at it even beyond that, but at least in more recent history with the Vietnam War. And now we have Republican Senator Jeff Sessions from Alabama who, along with only 2 other senators, both, of course, members of the Republican Party, voted against a bipartisan veterans bill that wanted to reduce the health care delays for veterans by allowing them to get private care and allowing the Department of Veterans Affairs to more openly fund clinics and other places where veterans can get care. Fortunately, it passed the House of Representatives unanimously. Unfortunately, we have this guy, Jeff Sessions, here, who said that, I'll actually tell you what he said. I feel strongly we've got to do the right thing for our veterans, but I don't think we should create a blank check, an unlimited entitlement program now. Veterans care is now an entitlement. And remember, it is an entitlement in the sense that those veterans are entitled to that care. But remember that entitlement has become kind of an ad hominem dirty word, Lewis, for much of the right. They say an entitlement is something that someone feels they need, that feels they've earned, but they don't really deserve.
Right. It has picked up that kind of a negative connotation in many circles. But obviously a completely ridiculous statement coming from the senator.
A blank check for an entitlement. The real blank check here are all of those troops who maybe, many of them, after 9/11, in good conscience said, someone did attack us and I want to get involved and I want to defend this country. They gave the blank check to Congress and to leaders. And then they were sent to Iraq under false pretenses, based on faulty intelligence, based on WMD that did not exist, and on this trumped up connection to 9/11 between Saddam Hussein and 9/11. They are the ones who issued the blank check. And now Jeff Sessions thinks that it's an entitlement in the negative sense to provide them with the care they need in a timely manner. Support the troops it is absurd at this point to still believe that the Republican Party is the support the troops party.
It's incredible. I know 2 wars that both had blank checks, and now we can't write a blank check for the people who we forced to fight in those wars. And we have an epidemic. I mean, every hour a veteran commits suicide in this country. They should have a blank check, really.
After Lewis expressed some disdain last week for patents, we actually received a bunch of emails from people saying, David, Lewis is spot on here. He's making really good points. He's asking all the right questions. And I completely agree with Lewis on this. And Lewis is not vindicated in a sense, but we have a really interesting story to follow up with Lewis's anti-patent tirade on last week's program, which is that Tesla, a company that Republicans were initially upset was even being funded by the government, that ultimately ended up paying back their government loans even faster than they were expected to, has now decided, Elon Musk, their CEO, has said, we are opening up our patents. We are not going to prosecute or enforce our copyright and our patents if anyone wants to steal our technology and develop their own electric vehicles or other renewable energy vehicles based on our technology. I think this is such a brilliant move, but not exactly for the reason everybody else seems to, at least based on the emails I'm getting. It's absolutely true, and I believe it honestly, that Elon Musk wants alternative energy vehicles to flourish, and that he believes, listen, we're not really adopting these alternative energy vehicles at the rate we should to combat climate change, so I'm going to open it up and let people use our patents. I don't care. Go right ahead. But this is a terrific business decision as well. And I don't know that people are realizing this because, number one, it is very, very expensive to start a car company, period. Okay. So the PR benefit of this, above and beyond the value to Elon Musk of pushing alternative energy vehicles, is huge. And really, very few companies are really going to just copy the technology and start their own car company. Now, let's say they do. Let's say a few companies take the technology from Tesla and start their own car company. It's very, very hard to imagine that they would start a car company that would be equally as successful as Tesla, but they would certainly bring attention to the alternative energy vehicles, to electric vehicles, and then people will remember, oh, wait a second, there was that company Tesla. They've been doing this for a while longer. If I'm considering one of these cars, I should also look at Tesla. In all ways, Lewis, this was a great decision when it comes to opening the field to alternative energy vehicles, but it is still also a very smart business decision from Elon Musk.
I agree. I think it's both. Of course, in some cases here, I think you will see established car companies also taking a look at this technology and perhaps trying to do what Tesla did. But you're right. Tesla kind of, I don't know, kind of wrote the book, I guess you could say, with electric cars. And they're the ones everyone looks at as the model electric car right now. So I think they're going to be prominent for a long time, regardless of this.
And the next step is to have more players enter the market in this arena so that we can see some more price competition and lower prices. Because as amazing as the Tesla vehicles are, Louis, they are completely unaffordable for most people.
They are, and Tesla's working on that. But I think overall we're going to see, I don't think we're going to see more electric cars as a result of these patents being released. I think we're going to see this type of technology used in other ways, in cheaper ways, because like you said, it's very difficult to start a car company.
All right, let's take a break. We have a great interview for you today. We have so many great stories coming up. Glad you're with us. It is Monday. We'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberals think they're so cool with their fancy statistics and math, but conservatives still have numerology. Find out about using numbers without liberal bias at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Josh Buchanan. Josh, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. We actually have, I sent out an email on Friday. We had a good Samaritan David Pakman Show member who offered to subsidize 30 memberships in half with $30. So instead of a $60 membership, this Good Samaritan puts in $30, and he had 30 memberships made available to people at only $30 per year, half price. 24 of those have already been spoken for. So we have 6 left as of right now. If you would like one of these subsidized half-price memberships, the offer is valid for new members only, cannot be an existing member. Just email us through the website, davidpakman.com, click on Contact Us, say, I want one of the $30 memberships. There are only 6 left, and to be honest, I would assume these are going to go pretty quickly. The first 24 went quite quickly, Louis, I must say. So email us, and you can get a half-price membership, the bonus show, all the member benefits, of course, included with it. And you get it for half price. Very, very cool. And I want to say a very special happy birthday, Louis, to new member Jason Flory. Happy birthday to Jason. Not sure how old Jason is, Louis, but I hope he has a very good birthday.
As do I, David.
You can, of course, support the David Pakman Show by doing your Amazon shopping through the banner at davidpakman.com. This is really easy. You go to our website, David Pakman. On the right side, you will see a Amazon banner. Click it. And then just do your Amazon shopping. You won't see anything different. What I recommend is after clicking the link, bookmark it, and then use it whenever you shop at Amazon. And then Amazon sends us a kickback for every purchase you make. It's a very great and easy way to support our program. Some interesting items, Louis, being purchased recently by our audience on Amazon. Many air conditioners, which I guess is no surprise, right? Because it is starting to get pretty hot. Back in Massachusetts, I had wall units. So they're basically... It's similar to a window unit, but I had these sleeves in the wall, and you put the air conditioner in there. It was fantastic because you didn't block a window, but when I would take out the air conditioner, very often there had been like a bird's nest built towards the back of that sleeve, and it was pretty annoying, I must say. Once a bird actually got caught in there, and it was completely nuts what was going on with my air conditioners in Massachusetts.
Yeah, central air is really very convenient and nice. Those wall units can be a huge pain.
Yeah, absolutely. And now in New York City, I have the ones where it's almost like in a hotel, you know, where below the window, there's like a unit that's both heat and cooling. I have one of those now, which really isn't bad. It's kind of loud, but I at least no birds are getting caught in it as far as I know. Also purchased through our Amazon link, a couple of bottles of something called Cognitex with Brain Shield. Supposedly it's like a brain enhancer, Louis, and it's a life extender brain enhancer, and it contains something called gastrodon. I am fascinated by people who take these types of supplements. And my question is this. We, of course, have no data about who buys this stuff. My question is, how did you decide, if you're in the universe of believing that these things work, right? And I don't know if they do. How did you decide on that supplement versus the hundreds or thousands of others? And that's really where I get caught up, Lewis. I'm not against the idea that there are supplements that could be really good for brain health and maybe even longevity. But with so many claiming that they are the right ones and very little actual scientific data around it, how do you really decide if you're going to delve into that universe, what do you buy?
I don't know. I guess you have to read reviews and just do the internet thing, right? And try to find
but even that, reviews are going to be so subject to bias and the placebo effect. I mean, asking the people who take the stuff, it's obviously of almost no value getting reviews from people who take the stuff.
I would agree, but what else can you do, right?
Yeah, I know. I have no idea. Do you take any supplements, Lewis?
Nothing like this. I mean, I take, what do I take? Fish oil and glucosamine, chondroitin. That's about it.
Nothing for the brain, though. Nothing like that yet.
Well, I mean, some people say that fish oil is good for the brain.
Oh, that's true. Oh, right. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Right. Fish oil seems to actually have some scientific data behind it that it has benefits.
Yeah. I think generally it's pretty well accepted that it has benefits.
All right. Remember our buddy Ted Nugent? He's the guy who used his pants like a bathroom to avoid going to the Vietnam War, but then later became an incredible war hawk and actually celebrated when House Majority Leader Eric Cantor lost in the primary last week to Tea Party candidate Dave Bratt. So that's fine. Ted Nugent, of course, it's fine if he prefers Dave Bratt over Eric Cantor. But then he went further, saying that Eric Cantor, who was the only Jewish Republican in the House of Representatives, said that Eric Cantor was just like the Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels. Yeah, that's what he said. He wrote for birther conspiracy website WorldNet Daily. We've talked about them on the show before. And Nugent urged readers, let's go Eric Cantor on them all by throwing out politicians who, quote, indulge in Joseph Goebbels and Saul Alinsky smoke and mirror politics. He says, I say we the people have had way more than enough compromise, backpedaling, Joseph Goebbels and Saul Alinsky smoke and mirror politics for one generation. And I say it's about time we go Eric Cantor on the whole gang of deceivers and liars infesting our Congress. This is not the first time that Ted Nugent has used Nazi imagery. He called President Obama once a subhuman mongrel, which was a term favored by Julius Streicher, who wrote, "The Jew is a mongrel. He has hereditary tendencies from Aryans, Asiatics, Negroes, and from the Mongolians. Evil always preponderates in the case of a mongrel." And he also called members of the Department of Justice jackboot Nazi mother effers, as well as animal rights supporters effing retarded mongrels. Nazi comparisons or allusions are rarely salient. They are rarely productive in adding to a valuable discussion about anything. But if you are going to take this particular election, and I'm not saying I would do this, I'm just pointing out the absurdity of Nugent doing it. If there's anyone who is more associated with Nazi ideology, the Jewish guy who lost, or is it the Tea Party associated guy? And as we know, we talked last week with former neo-Nazi Frank Mink, who told us, a lot of my former neo-Nazi buddies, they are now part of the Tea Party because it has just been the natural place for them to go. I reject the use of this equation to Nazis, period. But if you were going to do it, it seems ridiculous to call the Jewish guy the Nazi, don't you think?
Right, but it seems to be effective because people keep doing it. And I don't know, I guess it's what their fans and supporters like to hear. With
Dave Bratt, the Republican Party has finally chased out the last Jewish Republican in the House of Representatives. So I guess they have that to, put up on a list of accomplishments or something. A racist mom has kidnapped her own daughter to prevent her from getting vaccinated and from learning about Black History Month. We've been covering the dangers of the so-called anti-vaccine movement for several years now. I still get emails every once in a while where people will say, David, you're not telling the truth about the anti-vaccine movement. You need to talk about the autism link. You need to talk about the government conspiracy to control people via vaccines. You're not talking about it. And I respond and I say, None of that seems to be backed by science. We now have a woman who, in spite of the resurgence of measles, the resurgence of whooping cough in California, has decided that she is so against her daughter being vaccinated and learning about Black History Month in preschool, which I didn't know they taught, that she decided to kidnap her daughter. She's from Sunrise, Florida. She's wanted on federal charges that she kidnapped her daughter, and Broward Circuit Judge Stephen Farron granted dual custody of Lily Everett to both Megan Everett and Robert Bauman. On May 6th, Bauman dropped his daughter off at the mother's house for a week-long visit. When he came back, there was only a note there saying that if I let them take her and vaccinate her and brainwash her, I wouldn't be doing what's right. I cannot let a judge tell me how my daughter should be raised. We miss you, but I had to leave. Federal authorities became involved when it became apparent that they had crossed state lines. And then here's the key thing. Bauman said she found this new idea that vaccines are horrible. I think she wanted to keep her from being vaccinated because that would keep her out of daycare. Listen to this. One of the issues we had was she wanted to homeschool my daughter. I didn't want that to happen. She didn't want Lily to learn about Black history. She just wanted her to learn about the Confederacy. Okay, so we've got a racist mom who also happens to be anti-vaccine. We have, by the way, preschool, the Confederacy, Black history. How can you learn about the Confederacy without learning about Black history? That would be a very biased explanation of the Confederacy. And number two, I didn't really know that in preschool, these were subjects that they touched.
Neither did I. Clearly, she just didn't want her daughter learning about actual Black history.
Right.
I'm sure she would probably have created her own Black history to teach the kid.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. And then the last thing is, even if she were in like high school and it was Black History Month, which is kind of the only time where a lot of schools even really get any kind of Black history education, it's relatively limited, right? If you think about what's taught over the course of 4 years or of 7 years or of 12 years in school, the amount of Black history that's taught is really relatively minuscule.
It is. I remember when we were in elementary school, the vast majority of the education we received on Black history was from our singing teacher, our chorus teacher, who just had us sing all of those songs about
Negro spirituals, for sure. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. We almost got more of that from the music teacher who just happened to be Black than we actually did in history class. A very interesting point, Lewis. Let's take a break. Next, Dave Zirin on the World Cup.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined once again by Dave Zirin, sports editor at The Nation, also author of the book Brazil's Dance with the Devil. Dave, we've been talking so much about the World Cup in Brazil, and over the years, we've talked many times about what is the long-term impact of Olympics and of World Cups for the countries, for the people of those countries. And generally speaking, it seems like it's not nearly as good as many people assume. And I'm curious whether the situation in Brazil is the same as in other places or whether it's different.
I would only say it's different in Brazil, and that in Brazil it could actually be a lot worse. I mean, anywhere these mega events go, you see these three factors come up to greater or lesser degrees. And that's displacement of usually the poorest residents to make way for facilities, the militarization of public space, particularly in the post 9/11 era, and debt. And in Brazil, you're actually seeing all three of these things to a degree that is pretty unprecedented. I mean, in other places, maybe there's been more debt, like in Sochi for the Olympics. China displaced more people for the Beijing Olympics. But in Brazil, it's all coming together at the same time, right at the moment where the country appears to be in a mild recession. And so a World Cup and then a 2016 Olympics, which of course are going to be in Rio, that were supposed to be about launching and promoting Brazil to the world as a rising superpower, are instead, for the people of Brazil, really a symbol of what ails the country, which is poverty, inequality, and the strengthening grip of the oligarchy on the country.
Let's walk backwards through some of the factors you mentioned. Debt is an interesting one because we often talk about, as progressives in the abstract, how just looking at the deficit or debt of a country is not actually the most important determining factor when exploring how the economy is doing. So make the connection for the audience in terms of how, when it comes specifically to the type of spending on World Cups and Olympic Games, how does that actually affect the day-to-day of people in the years that follow?
Absolutely. I mean, the issue of debt and deficits, you're absolutely right. I mean, these are abstractions. The real question is who has to pay those debt and deficits when, because those are less economic questions than political questions. And in Brazil, what you're looking at are a record debt because the World Cup is going to cost more than any other World Cup in history. It's going to cost more than the last three combined. And you're going to see the bill presented to the working class in Brazil, which is going to be the sort of thing that only raises the temperature on a lot of the anger that's taking place. And one of the reasons why the debt is going to be placed on the working class of Brazil is that the real estate industries are getting all kinds of tax exempt status for the building of these stadiums. And FIFA itself, the international ruling soccer body, is pursuing all sorts of projects in Brazil, corporate sponsorships, get television rights, etc., without having to pay any taxes. They are tax exempt, as that's part of their deal when they come to their country. So Brazil is actually going to make record profits from this World Cup precisely while the country is accruing record debts. And that's the sort of thing that's in a lot of the Brazilian press right now and is actually aiding a lot of the anger that's inflaming people to go into the streets.
So we talked about the no tax deal that was struck by FIFA in Brazil on the show a couple of days ago. And I got a few emails from people saying, okay, David, that may be true, but isn't it also true that generally having tourists in the country, the ticket sales, the restaurants being full, presumably, etc., is there not some benefit? And this was a common refrain from people when we talked about the financial arrangement. What's the simple answer to that question?
Well, the simple answer is that's the same argument people make about the public funding of stadiums. And it's worth saying that even in the best case scenario of those arguments, what you're creating is low-wage labor in the service industry that's seasonal in nature, that only exists where if there are games being played or if there's a mega event happening. I mean, because otherwise, what do you think they're going to keep hotel workers on salary if there aren't people staying in the thousands of new hotel rooms that were built for the World Cup specifically? No, not at all. And that's the best case scenario. You know, low wage jobs that are seasonal in nature, that don't actually grow an economy or stop the rise of inequality. So that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that all of these promises are made that have to do with tourism and the growth of the tourist industry, and they just don't pan out. So what you get instead, and I've seen this with my own eyes in some of these countries that have hosted these mega events, are dilapidated, abandoned hotels, you know, that look like they're from the set of The Shining or something, like just this, you know, this thing that's more of just a haunted skeleton of what was supposed to be this glamorous new locale for international tourism, and it doesn't pan out.
Before we talk kind of bigger picture, let's talk about those first couple of issues that you mentioned, which are the displacement, particularly of lower income people, as well as the kind of militarization of the police forces around the areas. We heard about this in South Africa, about how even the vendors that to some looked like maybe local vendors right around where the events were happening were really vendors that disproportionately just profited, sent profits up the chain to the corporate head, didn't really benefit the local economy. Is that the standard practice at all of these types of mega sporting events, or are there examples where the local economy does manage the sale of souvenirs or whatever the case may be?
No, because I mean, this is the corporate branding is really the brass ring for FIFA in this whole process. I mean, that's the big prize. So in South Africa, as I think you've discussed in the past, I mean, they even passed through trademark law through the South African government to ban the selling of anything that had the words World Cup or 2010 by street vendors. And so what these events do is they actually hammer the informal economy. Like if you want to sell a product, if you want to sell food, I mean, in London, they wouldn't even let fish and chips vendors sell chips because McDonald's had the French fry contract. So, I mean, these events hammer informal economies. And I mean, and in Brazil, I mean, I imagine you'll see a lot of bootleg gear, but unlike typical times in Brazil where it's kind of lax around that sort of informal economy, that sort of a street sales economy, I mean, you're going to see that criminalized and frankly militarized during the World Cup because that's what FIFA demands.
Okay, from a moral point of view, right? I'm from Argentina. I love the World Cup. Every 4 years, I look forward to it. It's unimaginable to me that I wouldn't in some way at least watch these games. What are people to do? I recognize every issue you're talking about. Is it moral to even watch the games? I mean, how does the individual manage this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think it's a moral question. It's a political question. And anytime we talk about boycotts, the first question is there a call for a boycott inside the country? Like, are the social movements, are the people who, as we speak right now, David, are getting tear gassed and arrested in the streets of Sao Paulo, are they, in fact, calling for a boycott? And the answer is that they're not. There is no call for a boycott coming from inside of Brazil. And so to do so would only be an act of kind of personal moralism. And I get that too. I mean, there's no international boycott against Nike, but I can't bring myself to put on the old swoosh because it just, it's like too much and you just can't do it. But that being said, let's forget that for a second and say that, I mean, I really think that part of being conversant in the political issues that are happening in the World Cup, part of that is also you have to be conversant in what's happening on the pitch and what's making people so excited in the first place. So I have every intention of watching soccer when I'm down in Rio. I'm heading down there today. I mean, I'm going to talk to people while we're watching the games. I mean, that's an important part of the experience. And if you lose that part of it, then you don't really understand why this is such a big deal in the first place.
Boycotts aside, is it even reasonable to think that the entire corporate structure around events like the World Cup and the Olympics could ever change? Or is it just impractical to think that in the world we live in today, this is how these events work? It's a completely plutocratic, corporatist thing, and you either accept it all or you don't.
No, I think change is very possible because I think that for one, FIFA is starting to buckle under the weight of its own corruption. I mean, the awarding of the games to Qatar in a situation that may have been bribery infused, not to mention the fact that hundreds of workers have died already in the building of stadiums in Qatar, not to mention the protests that are taking place in Brazil. I mean, these are the sort of things that FIFA can only really stand so much of. Before there are genuine calls for real reform. I think it's important to keep the pressure on FIFA. They are a closed society. They're an undemocratic society. So I actually think the more we have these discussions, the more opportunity there is to see FIFA change.
All right, we've been speaking with Dave Zirin. He is sports editor of The Nation and also author of the book Brazil's Dance with the Devil. Dave, thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you so much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Many churches do something called a 90-day challenge, where they encourage their congregants to start donating money to them over a 90-day period. And oftentimes it comes with a guarantee of sorts that if you don't see God's miracles and God's blessings upon you within the 90 days, they'll give you that money back. And there's a church in Grapevine, Texas called Fellowship Church, led by Pastor Ed Young, that is doing exactly that. I'm going to play a little bit of the video for you and the audio here of him explaining what's going on. I hope that if you have a tendency to feel sick to your stomach, you have the proper receptacle nearby, because this could really make you sick.
Well, you click the video, so you're at least interested enough to hear what we've got to say about the subject of tithing. Here's what we believe here at New Spring Church. You cannot outgive God. And the very first way that we put God first in the area of our finances is the tithe, 10% of our gross income. And we believe that what the Bible says in Malachi chapter 3, verse 10 is true, that if we will put God first with the tithe, that He will bless us. In fact, the Bible says He will open up the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing on us that we won't have room enough for it. We believe that, and we believe it to the point that we are challenging you to take our 90-day tithe challenge. And in 90 days, if you don't feel like God has blessed you, if you don't feel like God has done what His Word has said, in fact, if you believe God's a liar, then here's what we'll do. We'll refund every dime that you gave during that 90-day period.
A great deal in a new car isn't just...
This is just disgusting. I mean, this is indistinguishable from an infomercial rife with the money back guarantee. That it is the exact same thing. It is the infomercial of religion.
Yeah, it is. It's sickening. And I mean, it seems like there's a lot of gray area too with
exactly
how these blessings are interpreted. I mean, are they actually going to give anyone their money back?
I don't know, but I could imagine very easily a situation where you go and you say, Pastor Young, I donated, I tithed, even, Pat Robertson said, even if it causes difficulty paying for medical treatments or for my retirement, that I should still make tithing the number one priority. I did it and I didn't get any blessings. And then the pastor could say, oh no, God has blessed you. You have children and you have a husband and you're alive today in 2014. You have been blessed by God. You should really see that. I am sure also that because of this kind of power dynamic that exists, if you're already the type of person that because your pastor said to start shelling out cash, you're going to start the cash flow to the church, you're also more likely to be the type of person who would hesitate to go to that pastor and demand your money back. And it is just a perfect scam. And that's all it is. It's just a scam.
Right. This is a mega church that seems to be doing rather well. I don't know. Maybe they've fallen on hard times, but I have a hard time believing that they need even more money. But hey, I guess they do.
Pew Research Center has an excellent new report on political polarization in the United States, and it really shows the kind of day-to-day consequences of political division and racism and other stereotypes in this country. And they broke down, the questions were, how would you react if X type of person were to marry into your family? So the obvious one was, how would conservatives react if a Democrat married in? How would liberals react if a Republican married in? There was about 30%, roughly 25 to 30% opposition from that, about even between Republicans and Democrats, no big deal. That part made most of the headlines, but that's not the interesting part. There's another part where it asks people, well, what if someone who owned a gun were to marry in? Or what if someone of a different race were to marry in? And here's where we see drastic differences. Listen to this. Those who are consistently or mostly conservative, those were the options. Are you mostly or consistently liberal/conservative? If you're consistently or mostly conservative, you were around 800% more likely to be against someone marrying into your family from a different race than if you were liberal. Incredible. About 800% more likely to oppose an interracial marriage if you are conservative than liberal. Those numbers are very, very clear, Lewis.
Yes, very clear. I'm looking right at them, David. Not shocking, though.
When it comes to guns, those who were consistently or mostly liberal were around 600% more likely to be against someone in their family marrying a gun owner relative to those who are mostly or consistently conservative. So huge opposition, relatively speaking, from liberals into someone marrying a gun owner. Interesting. Conservatives are about 600% more likely than liberals to be against someone in their family marrying a person born and raised in another country. I would expect a difference there, but 600% is quite drastic, Lewis.
600% is perhaps a little shocking, yeah.
And lastly, liberals were about 68% more opposed than conservatives to a family member marrying someone who hasn't gone to college. Okay, well, that's kind of interesting. I guess given the other numbers, I'm shocked that that number is only that low. So aside from the fact that I stand behind the thesis of my entire program, which is that in spite of the fact that there are political disagreements from and against both sides, there is one side that is more consistently based in science, that is more consistently based in furthering what would serve the interests of more people rather than of fewer people. In spite of the fact that I think one side is correct, it's pretty tough to really have any kind of progress when you have such drastic political polarization, isn't it?
It's true, right? It's unfortunate there are just two sides. You're on one of those two sides, and those are really your only options. And getting into, I don't know, the subdivisions and sects, if you will, just, I don't know, doesn't seem to matter.
All right, let's listen to a voicemail. 219-2-DAVID-P is our voicemail number. Listen to this.
David, hey man, it's Joey from Connecticut. How did that dude get a hold of you? I don't believe for a second he worked for the FBI or the CIA. I think you got trolled, man.
Yeah, I don't know if this voicemail is a joke, but obviously I don't believe for a second either that Dr. Jim Guerra worked for the CIA or the FBI. I hope people realized that I didn't believe everything he said. It's just worth hearing out the entire theory in total. That's usually my view. Great bonus show today. A cell phone hologram chip. Anheuser-Busch lists their beer ingredients. What is in there? And Lewis may talk about Game of Thrones. That will be incredible to many people, I know. It will probably make some people cry, but it will happen. davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up for membership. Get the bonus show as well.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.